It wasn't an affair that showed me what had gone wrong in my marriage. It was a hand. My wife reached for my hand in the car on a Tuesday evening, just like she had 1,000 times before, and I took it, and I noticed for the first time that my hand had closed around hers out of habit, not out of wanting. I'm an architect. I spent 40 years reading structures, understanding what holds and what's quietly giving way. And sitting in that car, I knew. I'm 82. We've been married 54 years. And I want to tell you the three things that almost killed the desire between us. Not a single one of them dramatic. Not a single one of them the thing you'd expect. Because if any part of you recognizes what I'm about to describe, you still have time. It wasn't a fight that showed me. It wasn't a crisis, not a betrayal, nothing you could point to and name as the moment. It was a hand. We were in the car on a Tuesday evening in October, coming home from dinner, nothing special, the kind of evening that doesn't get remembered. And Barbara reached across and found my hand in my lap, her fingers closing around mine. And I took her hand. I closed my fingers back. And in that small, ordinary gesture, I noticed something I hadn't let myself notice before. My hand had closed around hers out of habit, not out of wanting. I'm an architect. I spent 40 years reading structures, understanding what holds, what gives, what has been under pressure so long it started to compromise without announcing it. I know what quiet damage looks like. And sitting in that car with my wife's hand in mine on a Tuesday in October, I knew. I want to tell you about the three things that did it. Not an affair, not a failure of love. I loved Barbara then, and I love her now. The three quiet things nobody names, that operate below the level of drama, that you can't see from inside the marriage because they look exactly like the marriage. I want to tell you because I spent years inside them without knowing, and then I knew, and knowing changed everything. Barbara and I were married in June of 1970. I was 28, she was 26. She was the most alive person I'd ever been in a room with. Not loud, not performing, but genuinely present, genuinely interested in everything, always in the middle of some idea she was working out. I used to watch her think. That sounds strange, but it's accurate. There was something happening behind her eyes at most moments, something turning over, and I found it irresistible. I wanted to know what she was thinking. I wanted to be the person she told. In our first apartment on Maple Street, we had a kitchen table where we'd sit after dinner and talk until it was late, in a way that didn't feel like any time had passed. She was finishing her degree. I was starting my career. We were both in the middle of becoming, and we did it facing each other, and it was the best thing I had experienced in my life to that point. The wanting was easy then. It wasn't something I thought about or managed. It was just there. The pull toward her, the specific gravity of her, the way a room felt better when she walked into it. I assumed it would always be there because I couldn't imagine what would remove it. I didn't understand at 28 that wanting isn't a fixed thing, that it has conditions, that the conditions can change so slowly you don't notice they've changed until you're holding your wife's hand in a car on a Tuesday and you realize you haven't reached for it in weeks. My friend Martin has been married to Ellen for 46 years. He's 79. They came to the same dinner we were at that October, sat across the table from us, and I noticed Martin the way I noticed structures. Something about the quality of his attention toward Ellen, the way he was still listening to her, not performing listening, not waiting for his turn listening, actually in it. I asked him about it once, walking to the car afterward. Not directly. I wasn't ready to be direct about it yet. I asked him what he thought the thing was, what kept a marriage like theirs feeling the way it felt. He thought for a moment and said, I try to stay curious about her, about me, about what's next. The day I stop being curious is the day she stops having a reason to want to be around me. I thought that was a nice thing to say and filed it away. It took me another 2 years to understand what he actually meant. The first quiet thing, using familiarity as a substitute for attention. I know my wife. That sentence sounds like a good thing. It is not automatically a good thing. I know her became, somewhere in the middle years of our marriage, a reason not to look. I knew how she took her coffee. I knew her opinions on most subjects. I knew her moods by the set of her shoulders and her particular silences. I had accumulated so much knowledge of Barbara that I mistook the accumulation for the real thing, for actually being present with her, for actually seeing her. I wasn't. I was navigating the map I'd built and calling it the territory. The map is not the territory. Any architect will tell you that. In March of 2018, Barbara mentioned a book she'd been reading. Something about how memory works, how the stories we tell about our own lives actually reshape the original experience. She was animated about it in the way she gets animated about ideas that have genuinely reached her. I was making dinner. I nodded. I said something like, "That sounds interesting." And then I went back to what I was doing. 2 weeks later, a colleague at a conference mentioned the same book. I said I haven't heard of it. Because I hadn't, not really. I'd heard Barbara say the words, but I hadn't listened. I had been so certain I already knew what Barbara found interesting, so sure that I had her mapped, that I didn't bother receiving what she was actually offering. I called her from the car on the way home. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "It's okay, Robert." The tone of it was not okay, not accusatory, just the tone of someone who has been hearing "it's okay, Robert" in their own head for a while and has adapted. That evening at dinner, I asked her to tell me about the book. Really tell me. She looked at me for a moment, just a moment, as if calibrating something. And then she did. And I listened the way I used to listen at the kitchen table on Maple Street 48 years earlier. And it was good. And I understood, sitting there, that I had stopped doing this, that I had stopped being genuinely available for what she brought, because I had decided I already knew what she would bring. I know her as a door you close. The marriage stays alive on the other side of keeping it open. The second quiet thing, replacing warmth with shared complaint. This one crept up so quietly I might never have named it on my own. At some point after retirement, our conversations changed texture. Not all at once. Gradually the content shifted, away from what we were doing, making, thinking about, and toward what was wrong. The news, the neighbors, the restaurant that had gotten worse, the way things weren't the way they used to be. Health, always health, a reliable subject with an inexhaustible supply of material. I thought we were connecting, we were talking, we were spending time together. And we were, but what we were connecting through had changed. We had been people who shared enthusiasms, who brought things to each other. We had become people who shared dissatisfactions, who commiserated. The difference matters more than it seems. When you connect through complaint, you are creating warmth, a sense of being on the same side, of shared perspective, of us against the world. That warmth is real, but it is a particular kind of warmth. It requires an enemy, an outside, something to push against. And warmth that requires an enemy is not the kind of warmth that makes you want to reach across a car for someone's hand. It's the kind that makes you feel companioned in your grievances. Companionship in grievance is not desire. It's something smaller, and it slowly becomes the only thing. Barbara never complained about this, but she started initiating conversations differently, more carefully. She'd bring something, a book, an idea, something that had happened, and I'd engage for a moment and then slide toward what was wrong about something adjacent. I can see it clearly now. At the time, I thought I was just being honest about the world. I was also being boring in a very specific way. I was being someone for whom the world had stopped offering things worth wanting. You can't desire someone who has stopped wanting things. Desire moves toward aliveness, and I had, without noticing, traded aliveness for a steady, comfortable dissatisfaction that I'd mistaken for wisdom. The third quiet thing, becoming someone who no longer wants anything. This is the one that frightens me most to name, because it went deepest. When I retired at 68, I told myself and everyone else that I was ready. I'd had a career. I'd built things. I had grandchildren and a garden and decades of stored interests I'd never had time for. I was going to read, travel, pursue. I was going to become more myself, not less. What I became, over the following years, was settled. Not at peace, settled. There's a difference. Peace still has appetite in it. Settled means the horizon is closed in, and you've agreed to the smaller space. I stopped having projects that excited me. I stopped being curious about where I was going. I had a comfortable life, and I lived inside it without it occurring to me that I had also, quietly, stopped being interesting. Not to the world, to Barbara. She had married a man who was in the middle of becoming. She had spent decades with someone who had forward motion, who wanted things beyond what he had, who was going somewhere. And then, gradually, that man had stopped going anywhere, had arrived at "this is enough," and settled in. And she was still there, still herself, still reading the books about memory and taking the classes and being genuinely alive in the world. And I was the same every day in a way that stopped being a comfort and started being something else. Martin told me once, in 2019 over coffee, the year after I'd started paying real attention to this, that he has a rule. The last Saturday of every month, he takes Ellen somewhere neither of them has been. Not expensive, not elaborate. A new neighborhood, a museum they've never visited, a restaurant in a town an hour away. Just somewhere new. I told him I thought that sounded exhausting. He said, "It did at first. Now it just sounds like being married to someone instead of just living with them." I didn't say anything. I drove home and thought about it for 3 days. And then I told Barbara I wanted to do something similar. She looked at me, that calibrating look again, and said, "Okay." And then, "I've wanted to see the botanical garden in the next county for years." We went the following Saturday. We were gone for 4 hours. I watched her look at things I'd never thought to show her. She told me things I didn't know she knew. On the drive home, she reached for my hand in the car, and this time, for the first time in longer than I wanted to count, I reached back first. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 28, or 45, or 60. Desire is not a feeling that happens to you. It is not a current that flows between two people, independent of what they do. It is the result of specific, visible, repeatable behaviors, and it dies by specific, invisible, completely ordinary ones. The 3 things I described are not dramatic. They are not the stuff of anyone's crisis. They are the texture of a marriage after the first 20 years, when the work of building is done, and what remains is the choice, made daily, invisibly, of whether to keep showing up as someone worth wanting. Familiarity used as a substitute for attention. Complaint used as a substitute for warmth. Contentment used as a substitute for aliveness. 3 quiet things. No affair required. No loss of love required. Just the slow, imperceptible drift of 2 people who have stopped bringing things to each other and started simply being present in the same space. I spent years in that drift. I don't know exactly how many. Long enough that the hand in the car had become reflexive. Long enough that Barbara had adapted, had built a rich interior life she no longer automatically brought to me, because she'd learned I wasn't quite receiving it. Long enough that I was living with the most interesting person I'd ever known, and was somehow managing to be bored. I know what your marriage looks like, or I know one version of it. You describe it as comfortable. You say that word as a positive thing, as proof of security, as evidence that you've built something that lasts. And maybe it is. Maybe comfortable is the right word for where you are, and maybe it fits. But I want you to ask yourself something. When was the last time you were genuinely curious about your partner? Not checking in, not asking how they are in the formal way that expects a formal answer, but actually wanting to know what was turning over in their mind. When was the last time you brought something to them, an idea, a plan, a place you wanted to go, instead of letting them bring things to you? When was the last time you were someone your partner hadn't fully figured out yet? Desire moves toward aliveness, toward someone who still has directions they're moving in, appetites they're following, things they want that they don't have yet. When you stop being that person, when you arrive at this is enough and close the horizon, you don't stop being loved, but you give desire less and less to work with. The couples I've watched navigate this well are not the ones who've avoided the drift. Almost everyone drifts after long enough. They're the ones who noticed the drift and turned around, who made the small, specific, unsexy decision to stay interesting, to each other and to themselves. Here is what I want you to do. Just one thing, today. Think about the last week with your partner. And honestly, not defensively, just honestly, answer this. Which of the three things was operating? Were you navigating the map instead of looking at the person? Were you connecting through what's wrong instead of through what you want? Have you quietly stopped wanting things? Pick the one that fits, just one. And then do the smallest possible version of the opposite. Ask them something you don't already know the answer to. Tell them something you're looking forward to. Find a place neither of you has been, next Saturday. Nothing elaborate, just new. You don't need a grand gesture. You need the decision that the person across the table is still someone you could be surprised by. That you are still someone worth surprising. Barbara and I will be married 54 years in June. I'm not going to pretend the last decade has been what the kitchen table on Maple Street was. But I will tell you that on the last Saturday of this month, we are going somewhere neither of us has been. And that on the drive home, I will reach for her hand before she reaches for mine. That's where it starts. Not in romance, in the decision to remain present to each other. Tell me in the comments, which of the three things do you recognize in your own relationship? Because if you can name it, you've already started.